And thank you for joining me live in this edition of the Brian Sussman Show. It's episode 252. Kamala Harris, the Orwellian 1984 candidate. They're rewriting her history like nobody's business right now. And based on my 20 years of reporting on this woman, from when she was DA in San Francisco to when she was Attorney General of San Francisco, when she ran for Senate in the state of California, up till now, I've been watching her like a hawk. She's a San Francisco sideshow, and I've got stories to tell. Because if this woman makes it into the White House, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are not just on the line. The American experiment is going to come to an end. And that's why it's so vital. All of us do whatever we can in our power to wake people up to the truth. And by the way, as long as we're talking about the truth, thank you for purchasing copies of my book, Climate Cult: Exposing and Defeating Their War on Life, Liberty, and Property. There's been an uptick in sales recently, and I know that my publisher is thrilled. So thank you very much. The book just came out last month, and you can get it on Amazon or wherever you purchase your books. Again, it's Climate Cult: Exposing and Defeating Their War on Life, Liberty, and Property, aka The Pursuit of Happiness. I remember reading George Orwell's book, 1984, back when I was in high school. And of course, the follow-up question for everyone was, could this possibly happen in America? And I think everyone responded with a resounding no, it could never happen here. Now, I was raised and cut from a little different cloth. My father's family escaped Russia. Well, one member of his family escaped Russia just about the time Lenin was coming into power. So this would be my great grandparents sensing something was astir. And they literally put their 13-year-old son on a ship to America. To this day, we don't know who his sponsor was, but he came to America with this admonition: learn English, and that meant learn and to read it and write it and speak it. Learn English, get a job, make money, send for your brother. Well, he learned to read, write, and speak English very well, although with a rather thick accent. He got a job. He ended up doing very, very well, but he was never able to send for his brother because the political winds had shifted. And at the end of the day, those who weren't killed by Lenin were eventually exterminated by Hitler. So I was raised in a family where we were suspicious of the government. I was raised in a family whereby I learned that things can turn on a dime. And when you think there's peace and security, the next moment, there may not. Friends, I'm just telling you, this is why I'm so passionate, and others like me are so passionate right now. The winds of change are blowing. Kamala Harris is the most liberal person in the U.S. Congress. You think the squad is out there? She may as well be their mentor. She was a liberal, progressive, radical DA long before George Soros ever started funding such people and putting them in place around the country. She may have been the template from which they were all cut. But I've got some notes that I'm going to be referring to throughout the course of time during this podcast. And I think the most important thing that really kind of hopefully woke a lot of people up was COVID-19. Those crazy, ridiculous lockdowns and the masks and the social distancing showed how readily Americans were able to give up their cherished constitutional rights in the interest of quote unquote public safety. And it was a global event. This was happening all over the world. I have a son who lives in Switzerland. This is how crazy it got there. We had businesses closing down, places of worship in the United States closing down. Some churches never recovered because so many people said, I'm out of here. This is stupid. I came here to worship Jesus. And what? But here's how crazy it was in Switzerland. This just gives you a taste of how easily some people are drawn in. In Switzerland, the churches were allowed to remain open, but there was everyone had to wear a mask. There was social distancing of 6 feet, but you weren't allowed, this was a government mandate. You weren't allowed to sing the songs. You could only hum them. It's just amazing. Within days of an epidemic being declared in the United States of America, we gave up our right to assemble, our right to travel, our right to worship, our right to do business. And we let the government, of all things, determine what businesses were essential. Do you remember that? Essential businesses. And which ones needed to shut their doors. There were people that went broke during this. So it's no wonder that radical elements of the government, politicians, deep state bureaucrats, the cultural left, have tried to continually now push the bounds of what we're willing to tolerate after this COVID-19 experiment. Let's talk about gun control. Oh, Kamala Harris is a big one. They're rewriting. You can go online. It's getting more and more difficult to find the truth out about this woman because they're all in to rewrite her history, especially on gun control. This is a woman who literally has said, we're going to do buybacks. We're going to do buybacks. See, that's fair. You bought an AR-15 or other semi-automatic rifle or firearm. We're going to buy it back. That's the fair thing to do. You purchase this, well, it's going to be like a reimbursement. But the buyback that she's proposed would be mandatory. So let's just take a step back into the world of 1984 or a step forward, if you will. What would that look like? Well, first, there's going to be a broadcast. For those of all those of you who own AR-15s, there's going to be the buyback at this particular location in your town. You need to go there. If you ignore the buyback, there'll probably be a letter in the mail saying you're in violation of the law. If you avoid that, there's going to be a knock on your door. Oh my goodness. What are all these men in black doing? It's a SWAT team. That's how something like that would look. And I've got news for you. There would be millions of Americans who would resist. Now, what are you going to do with those people? What's the SWAT team going to do? Are they going to be locked up without a trial? Oh, we've seen that before, haven't we? January 6th. Kamala Harris. Oh, she was a big advocate of the Safe Communities Act, the first major gun control act of its kind since 1994. And guess what? The Safer Community Act did nothing to prevent mass shootings as they told us it would. It had to do with getting rid of due process and allowing authorities to take away your constitutional right to own a gun without a trial, a criminal complaint, or even an arrest. I'm sure Campbell has watched what's happened in Illinois. That's the most egregious gun law of all. Very, very recent. They said, well, if you own a semi-automatic or high-capacity rifle or a firearm of any kind, you can keep it. You can keep it. But you have to register it with the Illinois State Police. This law is unconstitutional. It violates both the Second and Fifth Amendments. And guess what? Kamala Harris is a big fan. The woke mob, the bureaucratic allies, the deep state. It's not just the Second Amendment, but it's the First Amendment as well. And thank God for Elon Musk, because thanks to Elon Musk, when he purchased X, he found out a lot about Twitter and the government. The federal government colluded with Twitter to get rid of 250,000 accounts. Hello, right here, including accounts tied to journalists, some of whom, for example, question the origins of COVID-19. You look at social media and it's so obviously biased. And you look at this TikTok and the kids are just consumed with it, many adults as well. This is a Chinese operation that's collecting and influencing your thought to the point where TikTok's not even allowed in China, and it's a Chinese product. Kamala also likes the 1619 Project. Are you familiar with this? Do a little research online. It's just incredible. She's put out a tweet regarding 1619. These are the people who want to make you believe that America was founded on racism, period. Ignoring history. You know, it's interesting because my book, Climate Cult, is not just about the climate. It's about American history, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And I go into great detail about the founding of this country. You know, there were two Americas. Prior to the signing of the Declaration of America, there were basically two new Americas. There was New England, where slavery was not tolerated. And then there was the South, where an entire economy was built upon slavery. So you had 13 colonies, two different new Americas. But as the British crown became more and more brutal with these people in the new land, making it very, very difficult for them to live and carry out business and worship freely, the 13 colonies got together and said, listen, we've got some big disagreements on a lot of things, especially slavery, but if we don't hang together and fight the greatest, biggest military in the history of the world at that time, if we don't hang together, we're going to hang separately. So we'll deal with slavery later. But right now, we got some work to do. And that's when they signed the Declaration of Independence. And that's when many of those 56 signers ended up losing their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, and their wives, and their children as a result of signing that beautiful document. And then, of course, came the Constitutional Convention and the United States of America. But an agreement was made way back then. Okay, we've got this big issue of slavery. We'll deal with it later. And by the way, 1619 Project and Kamala Harris, we did deal with it later. And 600,000 Americans died in the process. Yes, it's an original sin. We've dealt with it. And we're still paying the price to this very day. But you see, Marx said it best, history means nothing. And that's why they're trying to rewrite the history of the United States. And that's why they're working feverishly to rewrite the history of Kamala Harris. But many of us will not let them. Here's what Kamala said about the 1619 Project in her tweet. The 1619 Project is a very powerful and necessary reckoning of our history. We cannot understand and address the problems of today without speaking truth about how we got here. The 1619 Project, you know, their thought process was the same one that got rid of the removal of Ben Carson, his name from a school in Detroit. You know, Ben Carson, before he ever ran for president, I remember we read this book to our children. We read this book to our children about Ben Carson because he was just a great brain surgeon, one of the great surgeons of all time. It was just a kid's book about a Black guy who did extremely well. And we thought that was important in the raising of our children because we adopted children and none of them look like us. And we thought this would be a good book for them to read about somebody who looks like them, who's absolutely brilliant. He was a superstar. Everyone loved Ben Carson till he decided to run for president as a Republican. 1619 Project, not favorable towards Ben Carson. They're also not favorable of statues that involve Christopher Columbus. Tear them down. Theodore Roosevelt, tear them down. But Marx, Stalin, Mao, keep them up. Keep them up. We need to remember our history. You see, here's the deal. George Orwell taught us something in 1984. He who controls the past, he who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the future controls the past. He who controls the present controls the past. They're trying to control the present right now so they can take care of the past and obliterate it from everyone's memory so they can get the most radical person in the US Congress into the White House. Oh, she's suddenly starting to moderate on all these terms. What did we to even believe about this woman? She's so cut from this leftist elite cloth, just like the folks at Davos. They have these big gatherings. I talk about this in Climate Cult. World Economic Forum, Davos, Switzerland, global elites fly in on their private jets to lecture the rest of us about our carbon footprint and the importance of going green. You know, other examples of the problem that we face. The public is far too used to rules for thee and not for me. Like Nancy Pelosi, another person I've been watching for many, many years. Nancy Pelosi, the woman who during COVID, she was allowed to go ahead and get her blow dry. No social distancing, no mask. Whoops, pictures. Well, it's Nancy Pelosi. Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago. The mayor of Chicago, who during COVID would go before the cameras without a mask, and she said, well, I'm on TV. Gavin Newsom, the man who probably wishes he'd be the nominee right now, might have had a chance were it not for the fact that they made this decision outside of the democratic process to have Kamala Harris as their nominee. But Gavin Newsom, Nancy Pelosi's nephew by marriage, by the way. Gavin Newsom owns a really beautiful winery and restaurant called the French Laundry. Do you remember during COVID? Oh, there were pictures of him and his crew drinking wine, sitting right next to each other, no masks. You know what I also find interesting about this? It was Gavin Newsom, when he was mayor of San Francisco, who had an affair with his personal assistant, who was married to his best friend. He blamed it on alcohol. He said, well, I've got a little drinking problem and I'll get it taken care of. I'll get it taken care of. So here's how he did it. He called up the woman who owns this place in San Francisco. It's a prominent rehab center. They do actually very good work. It's called Delancey Street. He called up the woman who runs Delancey Street and has always run Delancey Street and founded Delancey Street. And from all I remember, based on media accounts, he had 2 conversations with her over the phone. Never went to rehab in person, didn't go through an AA program, nothing. Two discussions with Mrs. Delancey, and he was good. He was good. Now, he's the only alcoholic I ever have heard of that now is able to drink. Again, what's it's the whole rules for thee and not for me syndrome. Governor Newsom, by the way, when everybody was at the French Laundry with their masks and without masks, I should say, no social distancing, drinking wine, that was at the exact same time down in Malibu, California, in the southern part of the state, a guy was arrested for paddleboarding on the ocean without a mask. But I love it how every once in a while there's somebody of notoriety who takes a stand, who's not in politics, who's not in the media, just takes a stand, and it backfires on the left. Like there was that NHL player a couple years ago. He plays for the Philadelphia Flyers. I think his last name was Povarov. There was a pre-skate. So before the game, they're warming up, and all the players were told to wear LGBT pride jerseys. So they're skating around LGBT pride. He's Russian. He's Russian Orthodox. He said, I'm not doing it. And the media went apoplectic. They couldn't believe that this guy, some people said he needs to be deported to Russia. He said, I respect everybody. I respect everybody's choices. My choice is to stay true to myself and my religion. I'm not doing it. And guess what happened? his jersey was quickly sold out. And for that year, it became one of the most popular sports jerseys in the United States of America. But as they rewrite Kamala Harris, let me just ask you this question. What are her goals? I'll answer the question in just a moment, but what are her goals? Are her goals going to change? I don't think so. Her goals are actually pretty stupid. Donald Trump has a goal. It's very simple. 4 words: make America great again. What a great brand. Make America great again. Now, the left would say, well, that means make America racist again. It means make America great. Make America into the kind of nation that has a military that can put down the 2 greatest wars in the history of the world. Make America great so that its economy prospers, so that it can be the most charitable people in the world. Do you know, in terms of charity, this is why having a great economy is so important. In terms of charity, people of faith in this country give so much money to great works around the globe, far surpassing anything the United States government does. We are the hope of the world. Let's make America great again by getting our economy ramped up so people, one, can enjoy the American dream, life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, which is the pursuit of happiness, enjoy the American dream, take care of themselves, not need government help, and in the process, help the world through charity. Make America great again. It's a great brand with so many different tangents that are all wonderful. You watch Kamala's ads on TV. The first ads that came out stated her goals perfectly. First one, reproductive freedom. In other words, abortion. Reproductive rights, abortion, late-term abortion, my body, my choice. What it is sex without consequences. What it is demonic. Now, before I continue, let me just say this. For somebody who may be watching on Rumble, listening on many of the audio platforms, somebody probably has had an abortion. Can I tell you something? God is able to forgive. And the Bible is very clear. When God forgives, God forgets. It's unbelievable. He remembers our sin no longer. It's covered by, as they say, the blood of the Lamb. So there is hope for you. There's a God who loves you, and he can forgive you of your sins. Now, some would say, well, you're just a guy. You have no reason to talk about, no right to talk about this. Okay, well, let me just briefly. My wife and I have walked the talk on this. As I mentioned earlier, we've adopted kids. That's what we did in the name of pro-life. We adopted kids. And in the 90s, I had an organization in San Francisco called Brian's Kids, which saw over 400 kids go from foster care to adoptive homes. So we walked the talk on this. But this is a woman whose number one goal, abortion, on demand, reproductive freedom. Then something else she talks about a lot, the trans movement. Number 2 item in the commercial, the first commercials that I saw, the trans movement. Defies biology, defies logic, something right out of 1984. Then she talks about increasing the welfare state and, of course, free health care for all. Workers' comp, Medicaid, Medicare. Can we just say this? For those of you who have ever been on Medicaid, you know that the doctors and the medical care you get with Medicaid, not the greatest. For those of you on Medicare, you know how this works. Some doctors will not accept you. This is a plan that's built for failure of the U.S. health system. You know, it's amazing because if this woman were to take the White House, and when I say take the White House, that's by hook or by crook. That's why Donald Trump says, we got to vote and we got to vote and we got to vote. We got to get everybody out there. No one can sit on the sidelines because cheating and foul play have been institutionalized in many locations. So we gotta really get the vote out. But you know, I can just see it now. If this woman were to become president of the United States, she would have, just like Orwell has in his 1984, she would have a ministry of peace that would get us into never-ending wars. like Ukraine, like what we had in the Middle East for so many years, allowing the WEF charlatans and the elites at large and the oligarchs and the military industrial complex to make loads of money. And of course, when they're making money, they're kicking back to the politicians who gave them these opportunities. A Kamala Harris administration would turn its back on Israel and give Iran the opportunity to do what it's always wanted to do. Hence, all of the anti-Jewish, anti-Israel rhetoric that's going forth and being fomented in the United States of America in free speech, even when they get violent. I mean, all you have to do is see what Joe and Kamala did in Afghanistan with our withdrawal. Donald Trump was planning on getting out, but with dignity. Here, if you listen to nothing else in this podcast or remember nothing else in this podcast, remember this. When the Biden-Harris administration left Afghanistan, they left the Bagram Air Force Base. Donald Trump had plans to keep that base for us. We built it. It's a very strategic location. It's 60 miles away from where the Chinese are building nuclear missiles. We left the base wide open, and guess who occupies it now? That was built with your tax dollars and my tax dollars. China has it now. China has a first-class military base in Afghanistan. That's Kamala's Ministry of Peace. Oh, then we'll have the Ministry of Truth, no doubt. We already have it. Have you seen that White House spokesperson? I've never seen anyone so able to spit out rhetoric that is so confusing and convincing. It's like she has a forked tongue. The Ministry of Truth. They'll pump out all sorts of fake news with their spokespersons and their comrades in the media, just like they're doing now to rewrite Kamala's record. All their accomplices at big tech with their algorithms to confuse people and cause people to believe certain things. People don't think anymore. They're told what to think, not how to think. We'll have a ministry of love, no doubt, in that White House, punishing those who criticize the government, criticize the new morality, which is no morality at all. And that ministry of love will pack the Supreme Court in the name of fairness and love. I would like to thank a guy who I've never met, Jim Nellis. He wrote an article in the Washington Examiner in February 23, 2023. It's called George Orwell Was Right. And some of the stuff that I've just shared with you comes from that article. But the establishment media is working overtime to rewrite the history of Kamala Harris. Friends, this is a time to be more committed than ever. Everything's on the line here. When a country goes down, it goes down quickly. We need a man in the White House who doesn't mess around. Yeah, when it comes to his demeanor sometimes and his language sometimes, he can be rough around the edges. And I know that there are too many Christians who say, well, he's hardly a Christian. I'm not going to vote for him. We're not voting for pastor. We're voting for the commander-in-chief. We're voting for someone that the bad guys around the world will respect, just as they did before. We're voting for someone who understands business. And we're voting for someone, by the way, who understands that government, big government, is not what the founders of this nation had intended. It was a limited government. Limited government. Got to get the word out. We've got to get the vote out. And friends, I just encourage you to pray. Maybe you're not a praying person, but if you were to ever begin praying for the United States of America, now is the time. And as I always like to say, I dedicate these podcasts to shining light in the darkness. 1 John 1:5. Thank you very much, friends, for joining me. Please make sure you follow me on this channel on Rumble. And please check out my website, briansussman.com. Don't forget my book, Climate Cult. And on X, it's the account that was recovered about a year ago. It's Debate Me, Al Gore. Thank you so much, everyone. Please spread the word on this podcast. And God bless you.